Welcome to Behind the Story with Naomi and Lisa, where we learn the story behind the story. I'm Naomi Craig, historical fiction author of Rahab's Courage.
And I'm Lisa Renee from the Collaborative Press. I'm also a romance contemporary author of the Single Again series. So welcome today, and we just want to first up draw our winner from last episode. Our New Year episode, we had an opportunity to win a $10 Amazon voucher. So people just had to share on our YouTube or comment that they've done. And oh, here we go. I'm just going to read your first name because you've got a big long last name. Alina. She shared on Lisa's my YouTube channel. So thank you. We will contact you and give you that awesome voucher. And there were opportunity for people to download our free novellas as well if you want to check out our last episode from New Year's. Over to you, Naomi.
All right, today our special guest is Regency and Contemporary author Carolyn Miller. Carolyn lives in the beautiful Southern Highlands of New South Wales, Australia, with her husband and her 4 children. A longtime lover of romance, Carolyn loves drawing readers into fictional worlds that show the truth of God's grace in our lives. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Story.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
And it's very exciting to me because I'm a big fan of Caroline. We have met. We met at an Australian conference before COVID. We missed out on meeting again because of this silly virus. But anyway, I just want everyone to know that Caroline is an awesome Aussie author, but she's just down to earth, very relatable, not high and mighty, although her Regency is very posh and everything. She is not posh and snobby. She's just lovely, and I'm so excited to have her, especially a fellow Aussie author. So I'm really excited that I love her Regency series, and my daughter loves it as well. She's really into historical fiction, so we've got most of her books. But I'm also very excited about this new series that she's got out. She's joined in with Celebrate Lit with the Independence Island series, and she's just restoring Fairhaven, a part of that series. So I want to find out a bit more about that, Caroline. What sparked the story, and how did you come up with the idea?
So some people might not know, but I actually started by writing contemporary fiction ages ago, so about 10 years ago or so. And so it was just the fact that a lot of my stories were about Australian characters or used Australian settings that US publishers weren't that interested in. So I thought, well, rather than change a lot of those factors to be more US friendly, I would see if people would be interested in my Jane Austen inspired fiction, which they were. So that's kind of cool. So my contemporary fiction, and particularly this Restoring Fairhaven thing, is a bit of a transition back to some of my roots in terms of contemporary fiction and trying to tell stories that are relatable and so on. So Restoring Fairhaven is about a girl who's taking on her father's business, which is a gardening company. I'm married to a horticulturalist, so it was really fun to be able to pick my husband's brains and, use a lot of his sort of expertise in running a small business into this sort of story, but also the fact that it's relating to a reclusive writer I can relate to a little bit, who happens to be a historical writer. Oh, hello.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, so it was quite fun to be able to incorporate a few of those things that I know or I can glean from others close to me into this story, and just how, one of my favourite stories is My Stubborn Heart by Becky Wade, and I love that whole idea of how you break out of your sadness and sorrow, and that's kind of the story of the male hero in this story, Restoring Fairhaven, and just being able to sort of incorporate those things has been really fun. So it's the last of the Merriweather, is it Merriweather? I think it's Merriweather Island on the Independence Islands. So I sort of am the last person in each of these sort of. So the next one of mine, which comes out in June next year, will be set on a different island. So it's been lots of fun, though, to sort of bounce ideas off other authors in that series, and just to work together, but also to build a bit of a contemporary readership, so that when I self-publish my own original stories down the track, I've actually got some readers who want to read them. There you go.
Now, I've got to admit, I am sorry to say I haven't read any of your Regencies yet, but I've heard so much about you on avid readers and all over, and about, oh, you have to read the Regencies of Carolyn's. And so then my big question was, how is she going to make the gap between Regency to contemporary? And I have since then read Restoring Fairhaven, and I was like, that's how, with Max being a historical author. And I have to tell you, this is revealing. So I really observe people, like, in most of the time it's on Facebook. So I'll kind of like a stalker, but like I'll know random details. If you pass random details, and I'll be like, okay, so there's a good chance if we ever meet in public, I'm going to make it weird. But I saw I saw this character Max, and he has such a wonderful vocabulary. I gave myself the permission to make the assessment. That is how she made the gap, is because of Max. And that, so there you go. You're welcome. I'm sure you were waiting for for my affirmation, but I thought you handled the story really well. I really enjoyed it. And I'm a fan now, so I'm going to have to go find your Regencies. So what inspired your writing, and how many years have you been writing, and what would you give as advice to someone before they wrote their first book?
Oh, gosh. So, okay. My inspiration, I'm a bit of a Winter Olympics fan. I don't do anything. I don't ski, no. But I just think that the adrenaline and the skill and, oh my gosh, just the courage that these athletes need to be able to do the crazy things they do. I'm just so impressed by that. So I was watching the Winter Olympics at Vancouver. I wasn't in Vancouver. I was actually in a gym watching it on TV, and I saw this Australian athlete walk into the closing ceremony holding hands with an American boy. And it's like, how on earth does that happen? How can you have two people from two different parts of the world, two different sports, I imagine? How do you actually form a relationship, sustain a relationship in such a high pressure kind of thing? That was kind of like, it just boggled my mind. And so I tried to find out who this was, what their story was. Couldn't, so I made it up. and so it became this sort of passion project. And so for most of 2010, I was just writing and tweaking and writing and tweaking. And, you know when you write your first book and it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I have to get this sentence just right. And you spend so many hours writing and writing and writing. And eventually this story became a 150,000 word craziness. And it's just like, okay, so my advice to people when you first start writing is to firstly figure out, what are you writing for? I wanted to write, I didn't actually realize at that time that I would turn it into a career. I just wanted to get this story from my head into somewhere else, like a page. So, it could just be done. But if it is going to be something that you're interested in doing, then write the story and move on to the next one. Because otherwise, I know people who spend forever and they spend years writing, tweaking. And I just think now, okay, that was a learning process. I learned a lot from that. And I've now edited it down to a more, manageable level. But that sort of stuff I think is really important, because otherwise you can spend forever, tweaking and fine-tuning something that really probably doesn't need it, just needs you to move on to the next thing. Because a lot of those first novels can become practice novels that you kind of learn from. And so I think the most important thing is to finish a novel, but then figure out, are you actually going to do something with it? Is it going to be published for others? Is it going to be published for a certain market? So, for example, I have Australian friends who are writers who are very frustrated that US agents, etc., are not interested in their Australian-based stories. And it's like, okay, well, that's because a lot of them can't necessarily relate, or you know, they think that the market is mostly interested in US based stories, which, you know, I think that's changing, but there's still an element of frustration. That's why can't people be interested in our stories? We always read their stories, etc., etc. Would you relate? Would you agree, Lisa, that that's something?
Yeah, it was when Steve Lobby said, you know, a publisher will think 40% less sales if it's on a different out of America with non-American characters. I was like, ah. And so I changed my first, I'd already had, because I'd indie published, I was able to change the character, but I changed one of them to American, and I was about to release another one. I changed one of their characters to American.
Yeah.
And the next one. And so, yeah, Americans want to be able to relate. And then when he said, you know, if you want, someone's going to write a story in Singapore, you know, I was thinking, yeah, I probably wouldn't be really into that. But if there was maybe an Australian going to Singapore, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I can understand it. So yeah, definitely good advice. And it is a bit controversial for us Australians, but we don't really have the big Christian market, you know, even how many Christians we've got, but then who are actually readers. So we do need to consider international markets, definitely.
Absolutely. And that was part of the plan. So it's just like, okay, let's, you know, start off with the English stuff, because you can't really argue with Jane Austen. I mean, hello. And then do this Independence Island series and sort of build my readership, and then, you know, publish the books that I guess I really love.
Awesome. Great. Now, so you talked about, we'll talk about this Regency series a little bit, but I read on your website that you visited England. So can you just tell me a bit more about that? How much of the research went into your books, and have you written some books first before you went? Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So my sister was living in London at the time, and I kind of felt like it was one of those things, if I don't go and visit her now, I will never have that opportunity to go and do that. So my husband was very gracious and was willing to look after 4 children. I can't remember if they were under 12 at the time or whatever, but, you know, when he opened that door, a glimmer, I just leapt on through and said, okay, I'm going. And it was only like 3 weeks or so, but I made sure that I made the most of all of that. So I had, I think, 4 of my books already written at that stage. So I made sure that I visited the different places that I talked about. So some of the places I went to included London. I went to Bath, because, you know, any Jane Austen fan has to go to Bath. Visited Brighton. Went to Scotland, went to the Peak District, which is where Chatsworth and places like that. So if you've ever watched Pride and Prejudice, you know Mr. Darcy's amazing Pemberley house, that's all in that Peak District sort of area. So it was so fun to be able to incorporate some of those details. So I went on a walk in the Cotswolds, which I described in The Elusive Miss Ellison. And so just to be able to add a little bit more detail to that was really, really cool. I visited the castle that's on the front of Misleading Miss Verity. And it was seriously one of those little God moments of, I'd been in my little house in my little town in Mossvale here in Australia, and seen on the web this picture of this amazing castle. And I was like, oh God, one day I'd really, really like to go there, please. And then to be actually able to sit in the garden of this castle going, oh God, I can't believe I'm doing this right now. It was like a goosebump sort of moment of God's graciousness and goodness to me. So yeah, it's been really fun to be able to incorporate some of those stories. Some other stories came out of those. So my 3rd novel, which is The Dishonourable Miss Delancey, is actually set in Brighton. So I was able to use my visit to the Marine Pavilion there, which is mentioned in the story, was being restored and renovated at the time that the story is set. It was really, really cool to be able to, you know, include those sorts of details and things like that. And I have lots of pictures on my website. So, you know, I like to share some of the fun and thrill of visiting these places, which I never thought I would get the chance to do so.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like a lovely time for sure. I think it's funny that, I mean, first of all, points for both of you for working international. That's impressive. But I think it's funny that they don't want an Australian, but then yet English is okay. Like,
Yes.
It's still international.
The really funny thing of it all is that they want US spelling for
Yeah.
English Regency. And you just go, huh? But okay, because apparently the way that we spell stuff is wrong. Oh! So that's another funny sort of layer just to add to the whole mix of
Even
things.
though you're probably a lot closer to Regency era than American.
One doesn't want to say that out loud.
Well, I guess it's good that I said it then. So, so do you hide any secrets in your books that only a certain amount of people find?
Well, maybe I'm just too much of a patriot, but yes, there are little Australian references through most of my books. So I was very mindful in the first 6 or 7 or so to have little Australian references, which might just mean, part of a map, or it might mean like a flower or an animal that gets referenced. So, and it was really fun because my second book, which is called The Captivating Lady Charlotte, so he has like a stuffed animal of, gosh, it was a type of wallaby, but you have to kind of get the Regency name for it. So, being able to incorporate stuff like that, it's like, it amuses me. And if somebody, is looking for it, they might be able to find it. But, stuff like that I just find really, really fun because, it's my little silent protest of, well, if you can't have the right spelling, let's do this instead and see who notices. Not that I'm bitter, not bitter.
All right, now we had the opportunity to bring in some readers and get some burning questions for Carolyn. So first up, we had, and I do apologize, there were a couple of multiples, so if we don't specifically name your names, we do thank you for asking the question. But first up, we've got Natalie, and Natalie says, Carolyn, I have loved every one of your books. I'm wondering, when you include the games that are played at the house parties, as in Heaven and Nature Sing, did you make them up or are they real games people played? And if yes, how did you find out about them? I am intrigued.
Okay, so hi Natalie, so glad you've enjoyed the stories. They are real games from that I was able to find out via the internet. God bless the internet. And yes, I came across this amazing sort of document which was called Winter's Evening Companion by somebody who titled herself Rachel Revell. So that was a made-up name, but basically she listed a whole bunch of winter games that were appropriate for Christmas parties, for house parties, in the Regency era. So it was really, really cool because a lot of these were like variations of games that we might play as children, but it was just a fascinating thing to explore because Regency time, so 200 years ago, they didn't have any of the technology that we just take for granted. And so the way that people would entertain themselves had to be very, very different. So people would read books aloud, they would perform music. That's why a lot of those sorts of things were so important for a girl to be considered accomplished, because she actually had a role to play, in entertaining guests when she had a house of her own and all that sort of stuff. So I found that really, really interesting. So yes, a lot of those games were real games, which I researched via the internet. Thank you, internet.
And Natalie also says, are there old diaries or housekeeping records from these country estates that you read? Side note, I can't imagine anything better than a couple of weeks in a grand country estate in winter at Christmas time. Fine food, fun games, and a bit of romance. Heaven.
I can't imagine anything much better either, especially as an Australian where our Christmases are sunny and summery and all the rest of it. That would be really fun. Yes, there are old diaries and housekeeping records, but I don't tend to go into too much detail with those. It's good to know they're there. And so I might sort of use it as a basic sort of summary sort of thing, but I don't care about, that's not my main focus. If I was writing straight historical fiction, perhaps that would be, but because it's historical romance, the emphasis is always going to be on the relationships, which means the people. So yeah, that's good to know. Good to know it's there.
Awesome. Okay, and we've got Christine. She asks, what are the spiritual challenges of writing Christian fiction? What difference does that make for you during your writing process?
Well, I haven't written anything that isn't Christian, I guess because I'm a Christian and I try to write like what I would be. So for me, I guess my Christianity is such a part of me. It's natural that I would have things like, questions, characters would be asked, would be praying, would be reading their Bible, would be going to church, that sort of stuff, because that's just what I am like. And so for that sort of the spiritual challenges, I guess partly it's what are some of the things that I personally have faced or that my friends or family members might have faced. So with different stories, it's not all autobiographical, but there are definitely elements of how would I face that particular challenge myself. And I guess the difference with the writing process, well, I as a Christian, I pray, and I sometimes reach points where I'm writing and it's just like, dear God, I need your help right now because I don't know what to do. And I really do see answers and things that look really, too tangled. God can sort of go, oh, and there it is. There's some answers. So, yeah, I guess that's one of the things I see with writing Christian fiction. Yeah.
Great. Well, Christine also asks a bit more about that, but I had a question as well about the general market. So she was asking, how do you want to impact non-Christians? And my question was, with general market readers, are they more accepting of Christian fiction because it's historical, and in that time, it was common to include faith, going to church, all that kind of stuff. So do you find you have a lot of general market readers, or are you finding it's more Christian?
Well, as I've been traditionally published, it's hard to actually know and nail down who the specifics are of my readership. But I would think most of them would be Christians. But I do know that I have some non-Christian friends who have read my books, and I find it fascinating because I don't feel like I shy back from my faith elements. Like, there are prayers there. There are salvation messages there. And that you have these people who will proclaim themselves agnostic or atheists or whatever, and they're reading my books. And so I was like, I don't feel at this stage that I have to write general market to be reaching non-Christians, because that seems to be happening anyway. So, that's kind of good.
Yeah, definitely. I was in a book club years ago with some homeschooling mums, and some of them were there's a few Christians, and then there were some that were sort of new age-ish or that kind of stuff. And we got to pick a book, and I had to read one of their books, and whatever they picked, and then sometimes I'd pick a Christian. But it seemed in these other books even they had spiritual themes or something, and they're wacky ideas, And so I think it is accepting that or even in general market, people are seeking or they're considering these things. So it's not necessarily off-putting. It's just when people become preachy and it becomes into like sermon sort of type. If it's just weaved into, like you're saying, a natural lifestyle of the character, and that's their worldview, it's just more natural, and it's not like they feel like they're taking out a story and someone's giving them a lesson, a Bible.
Yeah. And for sure, historical fiction lends itself more to that, because there is, the church was basically the centre of a lot of village life. And so to ignore that is actually making your own statement, isn't it? So, I feel like I can get away with it. It's going to be interesting to see how the contemporary stuff goes. But again, I think that's based mostly for Christian readers. So we'll see.
Yeah, good stuff. And Christine has one other question. What are your hopes for your books, and what is success for you?
I guess my hopes, well, you want world domination, really, all the translations, all the films. Jokes aside, I really want my books to touch people. And so when I get little emails and messages and people say, oh, that really challenged me, or that was exactly what God's been speaking to me about, that is like, yeah, that's what it's about. Awards would be nice, but I think the whole point of what I do is to actually point people to God and the hope that I found in him. So, that's really the main thing. So that's what success is, when I get those messages and things like that.
Excellent. I love it. Now tell us, we're running out of time, but tell us quickly your recent book titles, your upcoming book titles, and how viewers can get a hold of them.
Sure. So my most recent book was Restoring Fairhaven, which was my first contemporary release, which was part of the Independence Islands novella collection. Just prior to that, I had my first Christmas novella release as part of the Joy to the World Regency Christmas collection. That was super fun. And upcoming releases, I have a new Regency as part of a new Regency series called the Regency Wallflowers series. So the first book of that is called, woo, there's a pretty cover. It's called Dusk's Darkest Shores, and it's set in the Lake District, which is what you can see in that gorgeous cover.
I'm just going to talk real quick so the camera will pick up your lovely cover there.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? So that comes out in April this year, and then I've got my next contemporary novella, which is called Regaining Mercy, which will be also part of the Independence Island series. And as for writing projects and stuff like that, I'm releasing a contemporary hockey romance series, which will be in conjunction with the Winter Olympics next year. So very exciting. It's very different, very new, but it sees some of those original stories that I wrote, which now I kind of know what I'm doing with. They've been honed and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. There'll be information about that at my website, which is carolynmillerauthor.com. So people can sign up for my newsletters and stuff there. And find out all about these books, including some of the pictures and stuff like that of the places that I've visited that I like to use in my stories.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining and sharing with our viewers today. It has been a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been so fun.
Awesome. So we're going to have all these links in the show notes, and we actually do have a little prize as well. Caroline's giving one of her ebooks. You can choose which one. And so we'll have a King Sumo link, and all you have to do is share that, and there'll be some opportunities to get some extra entries if you sign up to her newsletter and follow her on Facebook, that kind of stuff. So that'll be in the links. And if you enjoyed Behind the Story, please just like Naomi or myself or the Collaborative Press YouTube channel, and don't forget to click on the notification so you'll find out what we've got coming up soon. We've got some great authors lined up this year, so it's very exciting.
Yes, in the links, Lisa and I both have a novella for free for you, just for signing up for our newsletter. Mine is biblical fiction. It's Balaam's story. It's called On Desolate Heights, and about his talking donkey.
Awesome. And I've got Act 1, To the Polarized Love. Okay, so we've got an American over here, and he visits Rottnest Island. It's an Australian island where there's some rare marsupials called the quokkas. And in the story, they are going extinct, and Beth is on a mission to find out what's going on, and Lachlan comes to the rescue and helps her along with that. So that is a real fun, sort of like a rom-com style. The first 6 chapters is a lot of fun and stuff. And then if you like it, the full novel is on Kindle Unlimited. But yeah, we'll have those links there, and you can grab our free novellas. And don't forget to enter, just share this episode, and you can be in the draw to win one of Caroline's ebooks.
Woo!
Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Behind the Story. Until next time, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Thanks for joining us.
So thank you again for joining us today on Behind the Story with Naomi and Lisa. Don't forget to click on the links and subscribe to our YouTube channels, and you'll keep up to date with our author interviews. Have a great week. God bless.